Right, I think we'll start shortly. Hopefully you're all in the right place. This is the webinar to talk about innovative tools to overcome challenges of regenerative agriculture. So hopefully you've logged into the right webinar, and I think we'll officially start now, as the numbers seem to have battered off a bit. So let me welcome you again. Thank you for attending today's online session from CHAP, Crop Health and Protection. We're one of the UK's agri-tech innovation centres funded by Innovate UK, and CHAP in particular specialises in driving agri-tech to support a sustainable future for crop protection while working alongside government, academia and industry to increase the adoption of innovation. I am Lindsay Creswell, I'm the Commercial Director here at CHAP, and I will be chairing this session today. So settle down, get comfortable, and we'll have the next slide, please. So we have a good programme for you today. To start with, we'll hear from Professor Jane Rickson, who's giving us a presentation, an overview of Regen Ag and setting the scene for why we're having the webinar today. Then we will talk with James Standen, who's the Farms Director at Newcastle University Farm, and we'll talk about the challenges the farms are experiencing during their transition to a Regen Ag based system. Following on from that, we have Lena Hobbs from the McGregor Farming Partnership. Lee's giving a farmer's perspective of the system chameleon drill, which combines various operations into one through an inter-row technique. Looking forward to hearing about that. And more than just a seed drill, this piece of machinery is fast growing in popularity among the Regen Ag community, and Lee explains the pros and cons of that. And then finally, we have David George, who's a reader in precision agriculture, precision agronomy at Newcastle University, and he explores the role of modern machinery within Regen Ag systems, including examples of the latest innovations. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A. Jane and Lee, I believe, are doing video presentations. Any questions for them, then we can pick those up and we can pass them on to them and get answered ASAP. And then you'll be pleased to know that we offer a basis pointer for attendance today, which will share the details at the end of the session. Then finally, a bit of housekeeping, just to note that we will record this and share it with you afterwards for those unable to make it, and then we'll receive an email which you can share with colleagues, and we'll also post a link on our social media channels. So next slide, please. So here are the pictures of our speakers today for the next hour or so, and we're looking forward to hearing from them. And if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, ready for, and we'll use this, we'll compile all the questions and use them at the end. Any problems, if you need to contact us, do it through the chat box. And just to kick things off, to interact with everyone, we'll have our first poll. Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how interested are you in adopting Regen Ag on your farm or business? 1 being not at all, and 10 being extremely. And of course, if you're already engaged with it, it'll obviously be a 10. We'll just leave that up there for a few moments while you click away. Let's leave it for a few more moments. Everyone voted? Right, if I can summarise that then, poll number 1. So we have 32% of the 10, 17% around about 7, and luckily no one around the 1, 2, and well, 2% at the 3 mark. So that's very good. We're in the right place. Many thanks. I'll close that then. Okay. So so without further ado, then we'll have our first presentation from Professor Jane Rickson, who's one of our partners at Cranfield University. Jane has become one of the UK's most respectable soil experts, and we're delighted that she's been able to do this for us today. Unfortunately, she's not able to make it live, as I said earlier, but we'll pass on any queries or questions later. Many thanks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jane Rickson. I work at Cranfield University as a professor in soil erosion and conservation. I've worked in soils and soil science now for over 30 years, and I'm delighted to have been invited by CHAP to set the scene on this webinar on regenerative agriculture. I apologise that I'm not able to be there in person, but I wish you a very successful webinar, and I'm delighted if anybody wants to contact me after this presentation or after the webinar with any questions that they might have. So again, thank you very much for inviting me to set the scene for this webinar. The webinar is entitled Innovative Tools to Overcome the Challenges of Regenerative Agriculture, or Regen Ag as it's known with affection. And as I say, I'd like to just share a few slides to try and set the scene for the webinar and hopefully start some debate about how we can make regenerative agriculture work better. So I took some time to think about what I wanted to say for setting the scene, and my first question was, well, what's the need for regenerative agriculture? I noticed that I'm very biased here. I'm a soil scientist, so I would argue that soil health and healthy soils are at the heart of regenerative agriculture. It's so important, and I saw this diagram from the web, which talks about the 5 core principles of regenerative agriculture: minimize soil disturbance, maximize crop diversity, keep the soil covered, and maintain living roots all year round, and integrate livestock. And I would argue at the heart of all of those are healthy soils. It's very, very important that we look after our soils. Otherwise, we're not able to deliver these 5 core principles of regenerative agriculture. And indeed, the argument would be that once we've got those 5, yes, we can improve our soil health, we can foster biodiversity, and we can promote economic resilience in farming communities. And if that isn't towards a sustainable agriculture, then I'm not sure what is. So I would argue that the answer is in the soil, to quote a character from a very old radio program that even predated the Archers, those of you that know that particular farming radio serial. And if you think about it, soil is at the heart of regenerative agriculture. We get the crops, we get better water regulation, better water management during droughts. Soils are able to hold on to water, but also can release water during times of heavy rainfall to avoid flooding and waterlogging, compaction problems. Soils are also important for the biodiversity in the whole food chain, sequestering carbon, taking carbon out of the atmosphere by plants, and then bringing that carbon into the soil where it is stored. Very, very important, as we've seen in discussions that have gone on COP26 last week or so. So soils are really, really important in building up resilience in our agricultural systems to try and cope with some of these extreme weather events, for example, that we're suffering. And I had to feel, okay, well, where's the history of this? Why now for regenerative agriculture? And I went back to when we sort of are the last sort of major shift, I guess, or major concept in soils and looking after our soils. And you can almost date that right back to the 1930s during the US Dust Bowl era, where this concept of soil conservation really took off. And led to Roosevelt, for example, saying that a nation that destroys its soils destroys itself. And from that really catastrophic event of the Dust Bowl, so came out the United States Soil Conservation Service, which was all about preserving soils, protecting soils, restoring soils. Now, I would argue that's not enough anymore. We need to move on from just conserving soil. It's got to be more than that. Why am I saying that? Why do we need to go beyond soil conservation? Well, you just need to look at the state of some of our soils, not everywhere. I'm not overstating the problem, but in some places, our soils are in a really bad state, be it suffering from erosion or compaction, loss of organic matter, loss of biodiversity, whatever that state, in places we are suffering from soil degradation, damage to the physical, biological and chemical properties of our soils. And that in turn means that our soils are no longer to function properly, be it able to cycle nutrients so that they're available to crops, or infiltrate these extreme weather events, these rainfall events that we see, or able to store the carbon, which is so important in the carbon balance and sequestration and climate change arguments. So I think in places our soils, we shouldn't just conserve them, we need to regenerate them back to their natural state as much as possible. But also that's compounded by the fact that we're demanding much more of our soils. Soils are a finite resource. We've only got so much land that we can cultivate, so much land that we can get this range of ecosystems, goods and services to society. You know, you only need to think about what you have for your breakfast. 95% of our food comes from soils, and we only have a finite land resource, soil resource, on which we can grow that food. So we're asking more from soils. We've got huge increases in population, which means that there's an increased demand for food, and the food security debate in itself is very important. We also need our soils to regulate, given these climate extremes, these droughts, these floods. We need soils to help us hold the water during drought and release it during waterlogging and flood events. I've mentioned climate change. We're asking our soils to sequester, take atmospheric carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and store it within our soils. And we need our soils to support biodiversity that is under increasing pressure from urban development, for example. So I would say conservation isn't enough. We need regeneration of our soils. And dare I say it, I don't want to quote politicians here, but dare I say it, this analogy of building back better is very true as far as our soils are concerned, and why regenerative agriculture is so important. Now, I would say that we know how to do this, actually. We know the techniques that are going to help regenerate our soils, which are at the heart of regenerative agriculture. We know there are a number of soil management practices, including reduced tillage. Is it not possible to go to zero tillage? Well, maybe just reduce the amount of inversion tillage, for example, just taking off some of that intensity. We know we could add organic matter, organic amendments to the soil. We know that we could try and reduce the number of field operations. There's a number of soil management practices that will help build back soil health. There are land management practices that we know about. For example, can we de-intensify in some areas the agricultural production? Can we extend rotations? Can we bring in lay grasses? Can we extend the area of woodland, or even consider things like agro-silvipastoral systems where we're bringing more livestock into our farming, more interest in mixed farming, again, to build back better, to regenerate our soils and our agriculture. Buffer strips, headlands, even woodland trees, all of these land management practices we know can help regenerate soil. And then we've got crop management practices as well, things like cover cropping we hear a lot about, extending the rotation, as I've mentioned, intercropping, bringing more vegetation, more cover into our farming systems that will help take out CO2 from the atmosphere and put that carbon back into the soils to make our soils much healthier. So we know these practices, and we know these practices can do good, that they can regenerate our soils, that, as I say, underpin this regenerative agriculture, this sustainable agriculture. So why are we still having these challenges? What are the challenges that this webinar is going to address? And that's what it says in the first line. That's good. What are the challenges or the barriers to adoption of regenerative agriculture? If we've got this shopping list of all these practices, why is it so difficult to implement them? Well, it is because we still don't know what works where and when and why and how and who. I'm misquoting Rudyard Kipling there for a bit of literary culture for you, as well as soil science. Because we know that these practices do not work everywhere. they don't work in every year. We don't know enough about the mechanisms of why these practices work or not. And that's really what this webinar is all about. Understanding that one size will not fit all. Not all soil types, for example, not suited to minimum till, zero till. We know that different crops, different rotations, some places are not suitable for cover cropping because they lead to increase in moisture content, and slugs can be a concern. We know there's a lot of variability from year to year about the weather, for example. Does that affect how effective these different techniques are going to be? Topography is different. The machinery available is different. What do you have in your barn that can be used for these regenerative practices? And this means that we have what I call a large signal to noise ratio. There's a lot of variability out there. We don't have the confidence of using some of these practices. And I think that's why webinars like this, where we can demonstrate what works where, when, why, how, and who, are really, really important. So my final slide is really just to reiterate what the aim of the webinar is, to use the latest innovative tools and machinery that can help make the principles of regenerative agriculture, these practices that I've mentioned, an on-farm reality. And I'd just like to leave you with a piece of work that we carried out at Cranfield University, where we were looking at different reduced tillage systems and to see how effective they were at regenerating soil properties or healthy soils. Things like how effective were they at preserving organic carbon, or I should say regenerating, not preserving, but regenerating organic carbon, the microbial biomass in the soil, and the earthworm count. And you will see just that technology of designing different bits of kit that we're pulling through the soil can lead to differences in soil health and lead to differences in regenerating the soil, which, as I say, I believe is at the heart of regenerative agriculture. So with that, I will leave you to the exciting presentations that we have following. Apologies that I can't be there in person, but I wish you the very best for your webinar, and I'll be delighted to find out the outcomes from that webinar. So with no further ado, thank you for listening, and goodbye from me. Thank you.
Always a pleasure to hear from Jane, and of course we'll be thanking her later. We now have another poll, and this time we're asking, what drives your interest in Regen Ag? Is it aligning with policy changes? It's just a single question, so just give you a few moments to answer that one. Thank you very much. Can we see the results, please, Sandy? Improving soil health. Jane will be pleased. Thank you very much for that. Okay, moving on. I'll hand over to the next speaker, which is James Standen, who's the Farms Director at Newcastle University, another one of CHAP's partners. And James is about to talk about the challenges the university farms have experienced during their transition to Regen Ag-based systems. Thank you, James. I'll let you share your screen, and over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Lindsay, and welcome everyone. So I will just talk about some of our challenges that we've faced as we've transitioning to a more regenerative approach. As a bit of background, my name is James Standen. I'm the Farms Director for Newcastle University. And just to, I'm sure you all know where Newcastle is, but we are approximately 800 hectares of farmland across 3 sites. We have a dairy herd of around 300 cows, which is autumn and spring block calving. We have an indoor pig unit and arable land that goes across all 3 sites. And also, when I say we're a mixed farm, very much a mixed farm, we are also a mix of teaching, research and commercial. So not only do I have to deliver on the commercial side, but also have to provide a facility for teaching and research. So about 4 years ago when I joined the university, we were two separate farming businesses, with the pig unit as a three separate ones. So we reorganized the business. And what we wanted to do at that point was probably to put us in a better place for the future, seeing there were policy changes coming up, but also to make ourselves more resilient and also be able to deliver for the teaching and research. As part of that, we also started down the sort of key principle, the key principles that were covered earlier around regenerative. So our farming system started to move down these lines. What we've also done since then is relaunch our strategy to go further along these. So we wanted to minimize soil disturbance. We invested in a direct drill, cover and catch crops, and we started to put those into the rotation when we could. Maintain a living soil, and I'll cover that in a moment, but that has been a challenge to us. We certainly wanted to, and have done, diversify the cropping and integrate livestock. And one of the things that was alluded to in Jane's talk earlier is we wanted to adapt our farming system to the local environment, rather than being driven by 4, 5, 6 principles, whatever they are for the Regen Ag, that would tie us into a farming system that just didn't work for us. And that's what we've really been learning over the last 3 years. Now, when we made the change from our plough power harrow based system to our sort of direct drill system, we have probably had in 2019 and 20, with the, as you can see from my rainfall data chart, in 19, one of the wettest summers and autumns that we'd had, and into a very dry spring, into a very wet 20, and actually 21 harvest has been very pleasant. We didn't, we still didn't take crops in much under 19%, but we had a very good drilling season, and that's really made a difference in our transition. But certainly, when we look at why we made the change in our farming system, much as the point we raised earlier, we didn't think our soil was right. We didn't think our business had resilience to these sort of weather events, and we were looking to the future. Now, that's probably a future in terms of a subsidy system change, but also as our thinking has developed into one that actually where carbon and biodiversity is rewarded to us as farmers. So not only are we trying to create that platform for teaching and research, but we're also trying to deliver. Now, I think that our challenges really have been, and there's a list down on the slide there, and Jane alluded to it, and probably that last point, we had to adapt the system to our environment, was finding the way. What was the system that worked best for us? How are the techniques that we might want to implement? How do they work for our farm? The weather has been a challenge, probably one of our biggest challenges, but that's probably that our soils weren't in the right state for it, and that we might not have had the kit or the right way of thinking. Soil has been the issue, and the weather and the soil are tied in together. We probably, in all honesty, went too hard and fast to the direct drilling, and our soil wasn't ready for it. And we've not slowed the pace down, but we've been a little bit more pragmatic. We haven't done intensive cultivations, but we have tickled the surface a little bit to get rid of some trash, or to level out the field, probably on about 25% this year, whereas we haven't done in the previous couple of years. So again, as Jane said, we're adapting to our system in that regenerative approach. Timeliness has been a real issue. If I look back to 2020, the combine finished in the end of October, and there is no way that I can get a catch or cover crop in if I'm not combined till October with our system. And when we go on to, David talks about some of the kit that we now have available, we've really worked on being able to do things when we have the weather. So for example, the Avedex spreader, the Avocast that is now available, we will establish our cover and catch crops in standing crops. And we've played around with that over the last couple of years, and that enables us to get some green cover in the soil. And then we found the drill works a lot better, particularly in the wetter autumns, if it's going into green cover as opposed to stubble. So our timeliness of operations in the north and getting combining done, straw off, and then something ready for drilling has been very tight. So we need to change the timing of our operations. One of our challenges has been business resilience. And in fact, over the last couple of years, what we've had to do is really invest in that. And so in terms of our soil and our kit and the way that the team are operating has really been an investment in time and money for us to be able to achieve that. And that's probably something that we realized we had to do. We knew we had to do some, but we realized we've had to do more. So while we're changing our thinking, not only on the arable side, but also in terms of livestock and the integration, we've had to bring the whole team with us to think in the same way. And so our strategy and mission statements are written out and for people to understand exactly what we're doing. Just as we're looking forward in terms of our next steps, and I've put up a couple of slides to show some of the activities we're after. Timeliness is going to be a key one for us. That timeliness and crop establishment is really key. And so what we are trying to achieve is that green cover, that living crop in the soil as we move from one season to another. Now, what we've also discovered is getting our input balance right. And I haven't termed it as reducing inputs, because actually we're still applying products, and whether that's pesticides, herbicides or fertilizer, we're applying slightly different ones. We're changing the timing, and also we're changing what we apply. So it's not quite as simple as minimizing inputs. I'm calling it more that input balance, so we get what the crop needs in the right way. What we also want to overlay into the system is precision. And so we can do things in a way that not only gives the farm value, but also that I can provide the right sort of baseline and data for research that comes alongside it. In terms of new systems, the new kit allows us to experiment in different ways. Part of that's around, the plots and the trials that we would have, but also, for example, the middle picture there is our agroforestry platform that we drilled this autumn, and with trees going in next year. And again, the kit will be able to support us with that, and we're overlaying other ways in that regenerative approach. We're overlaying different systems and platforms that we can try and experiment with other things. And I think above all, it's the system in terms of resilience not only has to be resilient environmentally, but it also has to be resilient financially. And this move to the new system is really for us to drive that business resilience financially, because like everyone else, I still have to, the farm has to wash its face and has to make money. Otherwise, I don't have any money to reinvest. So we're the same for every other business, and we've driven that forward. So what I'm going to, I think that's it for me now. I think we're back for questions later, and I will hand back to Lindsay.
Thank you, James. Yeah, thank you very much for that insight onto the farm's real experience there, James. Now we're going to welcome our third speaker, who is Lena Hobbs from the McGregor Farming Partnership at Mill Farm in Norfolk. Mill Farm is a mixed organic system consisting of arable unit, a herd of suckler cows, pedigree beef shorthorns, and a flock of pedigree poll Dorset sheep. Lee is the farm manager and is going to speak about his experience of the system Chameleon. The Chameleon is more than just a drill. The machine's inter-row techniques mean it can work between crop rows after emergence. And although it's not a strip tilt, the machine can cultivate, distribute seeds between cropping rows. You can tell I'm not reading this. So it provides an opportunity for reduced machinery costs, greater precision, and a delivery system support reduced alternative input use. So we're really pleased to hear from Lee today. His experience with the chameleon is really looking forward to hearing about that. But unfortunately, he's got prior commitments, so he's going to he's provided this video, and we can forward any questions on to him later. So Sandy, if you can play the video, that'll be great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lena Hobbs. I manage the McGregor Farming Partnership. We're at Mill Farm in Norfolk. We have 450 acres, a mixed farm, mainly organic farm on a sandy loam. We've got grass-fed pedigree shorthorn cattle and Poll Dorset sheep. We've also got a commercial suckler herd, which are all profit centres in their own right. We use them to provide added fertility and biodiversity. They graze the clover lays, the cover crops, and we've got some low-lying like water meadows that we use those on. So we're 450 hectares, which is on a 7-year rotation because we're organic. We have got 60 hectares of conventional land, which we use as an area basically to compare best practice and benchmarking and things like that. It's just nice to have a conventional bit of land that we can sort of have a play with, really, just to see how, well, look at the other side of the fence, really. We try and do min-till, no-till. We do use a plough if you really need to plough in the clover lays and things like that, because organically there's no other way of really destroying a clover lays. I haven't found a successful way of doing it organically other than using a plough. But we try and do min-till or no-till on the farm. We like to experiment, so every field we sort of have a play. We do little experimental plots and things like that. So we're always open to doing an experiment and having a play, which makes life interesting. We try and farm with nature, and we have a strong bias towards conservation and sustainability. And we were lucky enough to be runner-up in the sustainability class in the British Farming Awards. And we won the Norfolk Flag Conservation Award 2 years ago. So onto the chameleon. The reason why we bought it in 2018. We were lucky enough to get a 40% leader grant on it, which obviously helped a lot. The reason we bought it was we just felt on the organic we just needed an extra bit of weed control. Previously to that, we'd use a Batterstat drill and grass harrows and an iron rock rotation, which are all well and good, but it's got quite a narrow window for weed control. With chameleon, because you can inter-row hoe with it, it opens up a massive window. So that was the main driver behind it. But you also get the added benefits of being able to undersow in the spring. So basically we use it in the spring, in a spring crop. We then undersow when we are on our last pass with inter-row hoe, and we use that to establish our clover lays for the following year. So you get a really good establishment and get going. So you're sort of gaining an extra couple of 3 months. Because traditionally we'd always establish it in the September after harvest. So that was a main bonus. We also use it to direct drill our cover crops. So we use basically once we've got the crop off with harvest, we then put the chameleon in, but set it so we can go between the rows of stubble. So we don't disturb the stubble. We literally just slot it in between the rows. We've had really good results with that. So very low disturbance and just literally just slotting it in. So it's a very cheap way of establishing our cover crops. The chameleon is has a low horsepower requirement. So we pull a 6-metre drill with 150 horsepower, so it uses hardly any diesel, especially when you're on a no-till situation. So that is all good. So we don't have to have massive heavy machinery. What we've found, the main advantages are with the chameleon, as I said, establishing clover lays, establishing the cover crop in the stubble. We also use on our conventional land to do no-till. Our conventional land is no-till. We haven't used a plough on that in years. So basically, we drill the following crop in between the rows of the previous crop. So again, no disturbance. It works really well. We've done oilseed rape with that, and barley, wheat, and spring beans, and that has worked remarkably well. Very cheap establishment, and we've had very good yields with it. So that has been brilliant. What we've changed for this year, we used to run the chameleon on 250mm row spacings with a single row. We've now gone to wider spacings, and now 333mm with a 100mm band sown. So we've got a wider band of cereal. I just feel that it's the first time we've done it this year. A lot of other chameleon users are doing that. I felt that it was the way to go. It should give them more space to till out and things like that. And then also another benefit is that it means you're actually inter-row hoeing a bigger percentage of your field, so it helps with the weed control as well. But we should still be getting the same seeds per square metre. The only problems or the only niggles we've had is when you come to inter-row hoe in the spring, if the crop is getting tall, the camera struggles to pick up the rows because it is camera guided at the moment. We have upgraded to RTK GPS, so to hope we don't need to use the camera or to rely on the camera so much, because Fred, the operator, was having to drive it manually most of the time. Which isn't ideal. It's hard on the driver. So we're now RTK, so we're drilling all the headlands on RTK as well. So the drills and the inter-row hoe should just follow around on exactly the same headings. It can't cope with trash very well. So if you're in a real high trash situation, it really struggles with that. Hence why when we go no-till, we're drilling in between the rows of the previous crop. That is the main reason we do that. And it doesn't like wet and sticky conditions, but then again, a lot of drills don't like it. It really needs to, if you're into a min-till situation, it needs to be worked and left to, depend on the weather, a day or two, just to haze off before you then go in with the chameleon. If not, on the press wheels on the back, you get a build up of soil. It just doesn't work quite so well. I think for any advice to anybody thinking about buying, try for a leader grant, because that helped a lot. Obviously 40% is a big thing. I would probably go straight onto a wider bandwidth. It seems to be working a lot better that way. The autumn crops this year have come up really well, look really strong, and got quite a lot of vigour. And it also actually, because you're on wider spacings, there's more room for the trash to follow around the coulters. And definitely have RTK if possible. I know it's a big investment, but it will save a lot of hassle in the long run. We tried without the RTK to start with, but it's definitely a worthwhile investment. Yeah, well, thanks for your time. I hope that's been good. I'm not the best at doing this, but yeah, thank you. Yeah, bye. Hi, my name's Lena Hobbs. I'm
A big thank you to Lee for recording that presentation. That's his first ever webinar presentation, and did a great job overcoming the challenges of remote recording, which we now are all well aware of. Now, finally, our final speaker, Dr. David George at Newcastle. David is going to discuss the role of modern machinery within the Regen Ag system, including giving examples of the later machinery that CHAP has purchased through our partnership with Newcastle, which we're really pleased to hear about today. And as with all CHAP's capabilities, they're open to all. So if you're interested in the chameleon, then maybe it's a chance to try before you buy, as Lee was just talking about. So anyway, over to you, Dave.
My slideshow appears to have started at the end, so I'll just whiz back through that so you can all quickly see what I'm going to be talking about. And only my mum calls me Dr. George, so that seemed very strange, and it's just to let you know. But yeah, my name is Dave, Newcastle University. I am not a soil scientist. My background is actually in entomology, so looking at beneficial and pest insects. But increasingly, a lot of my work, certainly in the last 5 or 6 years, has been looking at how we can utilise modern machinery and precision agricultural technology and things like new product solutions as well, to help us to realise what I would describe as sort of agroecological gains. So a lot of the things we're looking at the moment with Regen Ag align very well under that description. And like Lindsay said, what I will do today is take you through some of the work I've done previously, looking at how we can use some of that machinery to help us overcome challenges associated with things like intercropping, growing more than one crop in the field at the same time. And I'll give a bit of an overview on some of the modern machinery solutions that we're currently hosting at Newcastle University through our links as a CHAP member. So we've already seen this. This is the 5 core principles of Regen Ag. And we've already heard that we kind of know how to achieve many of those principles. We know the sorts of things we can do, like minimum zero tillage, cover cropping, potentially looking at things like intercrops and integrating livestock. But we've also heard that that's not necessarily as easy as it sounds. It's one thing to be aware of some of those solutions. It's quite another to implement them on farm, and all farms are different. No one size fits all, as Jane mentioned earlier. And there are certain key challenges to implementing many of these Regen Ag approaches. And as we've heard from our farms director, James Standen, quite a lot of those challenges tend to exacerbate themselves almost the further north we move up through the country. And certainly here in Newcastle and in Northumberland, where our farms are based, we have much shorter summers, for example. Shorter, it's wetter, and we've got those quite heavy soils. So in terms of direct drilling, in terms of having the time and the space within the rotation to fit cover crops in, it tends to be a bit trickier the further north that you go. But we are a very innovative sector, and particularly when it comes to things like engineering solutions, we've come up with marvellous pieces of machinery like this one, for example, which really addresses a challenge of harvesting large areas of crop as efficiently as we possibly can. It's not necessarily a solution that's been designed with Regen Ag or with agroecology in mind, although I will come back to something on that later. This is a piece of machinery that I've worked with previously. This is a strip till, and this is a solution that's really been engineered, and we used it in a particular study to help us do something that was really quite difficult, and that's enabling us to grow more than one crop in a field at the same time. And this is a Berkshire Sarcum strip till, and what we're doing with it here as part of a European project is to actually strip till primarily cereal crops, also oilseed rape, into 100% clover cover. And we were comparing what would have been a bare soil control, which you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, to direct drilling in 100% clover cover, which you'll see on the right, to an approach in the middle where we hope to marry the benefits of the two. So we wanted to keep the yield high, the yield benefits that you would normally see with the system you've got on the left there, the bare soil, and we did see yield suppression where we just direct drilled straight into clover. But we wanted to maintain those environmental benefits and those benefits to soil health that having a permanent cover of clover on the soil would afford us. And that's what we managed to do by looking at this particular machinery solution. So we're effectively farming half the field in stripes. And we've already heard RTK GPS mentioned. We did use that here just to make sure that we could go back year on year and farm that same 50% of the field that you'll see cultivated in the strips there, but always leaving 100 or at least 50% clover cover as we did so. And as you can imagine, that would address some of those potential challenges to Regen Ag that we see, particularly as we move further north in the country. So things like direct drilling into heavy clay soils, well, that clover cover really helps us there. The establishment, agronomy and harvest of intercrops. Well, if you think of our clover as being a bit of an intercrop, it's certainly helping us there too. And we've picked that clover so it doesn't interfere too much with the combine, and that sort of timely establishment of cover crops as well. We're almost using our clover here as a permanent cover crop over the soil, and certainly some of the farmers that we were working with, that's why they were most interested in this approach, because it was difficult for them to get cover crops going and to get the most from them and the most bang for their cover crop buck this far north in the country, whereas something like establishing clover enabled them to keep those benefits there year round. The success to that project and the other projects that were sort of funded around the same time, most of which I was doing in my previous job at Stockbridge Technology Centre, key to that was understanding what some of those barriers were. So this is specifically barriers to intercropping rather than barriers to broader Regen Ag. But to do that, we undertook quite an extensive exercise with 14 farmer-led workshops across 11 countries in Europe and even further afield into certain places in Africa as well, and came up with a number of barriers across drilling, agronomy, harvest, and a few other areas as well. And I won't go through them all, but you can see them all on the screen there. And what we then did was to explore those barriers, both with farmers, with machinery manufacturers, with product providers, right across Europe, to see where we could overcome some of those barriers with novel innovations, machinery solutions, new products that were being developed. And we were quite surprised, really, I suppose, at how many solutions were potentially out there. And we were particularly encouraged by how many were actually being trialled on farm by farmers in the UK and all around Europe too. And we actually brought that information together in a big, what we called a compatibility matrix. So looking at, I think there were well over 50 or 60 solutions to intercropping that we came up with. In this case, this is a part of the table that shows those for structured intercrop. So things like dual product seeders, precision drills, etc., could all be used or manipulated or adapted in some way to help farmers overcome challenges of working with intercrops. And that, if anybody's interested, this is available there. There's a publicly available report that you can find on the web as a legacy of the project. And even looking at things like combines to actually separate out intercrops in the field. So again, that combine that you might think of as almost the poster child of monoculture, we had some very innovative farmers who were adapting some of the sort of separation mechanisms within the combine body to help them achieve intercrops. I guess what we're looking to do now is look at similar machinery solutions that we might be able to manipulate in some way or to use to help us overcome some of those challenges of regenerative agriculture, particularly the challenges that we face at Newcastle University farms and within the region in which we sit. And I guess one of the drivers for that is that we very much see ourselves as being able to provide a service to the industry because of geographically where we are positioned. So this is just a map of leaf demonstration farms and leaf innovation centres. And what you'll probably take from that is that there's a bit of a gap in Northern England where we really could do probably with a stronger mechanism for dissemination and for information, knowledge sharing with the industry, particularly around topics like Regen Ag, where there may be specific challenges within that region to achieving the best outcomes from it. So actually, there's probably 6 core principles of Regen Ag, and one of those is understanding that context. In our case, it's the context of where we sit geographically in the country. So what we've done, very fortunate to be working with Chat, and we've been able to secure funding to actually bring some of the equipment that we think can help, some of that modern machinery, to Newcastle University farms to almost create what we hope will become a Regen Ag hub for the region. And this is a Chap having a visit here to see our Avocast Avidex spreader, which James has already mentioned, is something that we'll hopefully use to enable us to establish cover crops into standing crops. And we've only just got this kit on site, so we haven't really started working with it in earnest yet, but quite excited to start seeing how well it might perform. This is another piece of kit. This is our crimper roller, which again will help us potentially to terminate some of those cover crops that we're growing in that shorter season. They're not the only two pieces of kit that we've got. I don't really have time to go through all of them in great detail, but we've also got, as part of that Regen Ag resource, that system chameleon drill that you've heard about from Lee, microcast, NutriStart, and a comb cut as well, which again is all pieces of kit that we think might help to address key challenges that we're facing as we transition to Regen Ag approaches, and that we hope will be useful for others to hear about too in the region. How are we hoping to spread the word, and how are we hoping to make sure that these pieces of kit that we've got on the farms can help inform what others are doing? Well, we intend to start from next year. It's been very difficult, of course, during COVID. From 2022, working with CHAP and working with LEAF, we've recently become an innovation centre there. We're hoping to put on a programme of events where we can invite people onto site to see those pieces of kit in action, and also make them available for anybody that might want to rent them, to have a go with them on their own farms, to see if that Avidex spreader, for example, could help to get a cover crop in the ground and up a little bit earlier. Just a quick plug here to advertise the workshop that Julia Cooper, featured here, has managed to secure some funding from BBSRC and AHDB, and it's the workshop that we'll sort of use to kickstart that events calendar. And it's a workshop that will look at the barriers and solutions to Regen Ag practices in the north of England, where we will be hosting workshops at Newcastle, at our own farms, where there's the opportunity to actually have a look at that CHAP Regen Ag kit that we have here, but also going across to Cumbria and down to Yorkshire as well. And these probably won't be widely advertised, because I'd imagine numbers will need to be restricted to the numbers that we can fit within our meeting rooms. But if anybody on the call is interested, please do drop me an email if you'd like to attend those, and I can forward your details on to Julia, who'll be preparing those invites in due course. Right, I've had 12 of my 10 minutes, so I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. Forever known as Dr. George from now on for me. That was a really good presentation, and that was extremely interesting. And I wanted to say that, as I said earlier, all of that kit with our farm up at Newcastle, with our partners Newcastle University, is all available, open to all, for anyone to try before you buy, as I said earlier. And I can see from the chat there was quite a lot of interest in the strip till. That's based with our partners at Stockbridge Technology. So if anybody's interested in trialling that as well, then please get in touch and let me know, and we can arrange that for you. So yeah, and Dave, your event at Newcastle, we'll keep an eye on when that's going to be, and we'll promote that on our website so that people know, you know, if it's appropriate for them to be there. That's when that's coming up. So I think we're nearly finished now. I think we've got one more poll before we do the Q&A. And you could answer which new CHAP Regen assets do you think would be most useful? Just select one, and we'll leave it there for a few moments.
Hi, Lindsay, I think you might be on mute. Hi, everybody.
I didn't see the results of the poll. Oh, there we are. That's what I was waiting for. Brilliant, great. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. It's got great insight for us. Okay, Janine, who you just met just then, she heads up our marketing team, and we're going to sort of field the questions.
Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, we've got some great ones in the Q&A box, actually. I can pop a couple together. I think they popped up when James was talking, actually. And that was, if you're putting cover crops into standing crops, how does that affect combining and baled straw? And also, which cover crops have been successfully established in the previous crop?
Does Dave want to stick his video on so I can see him? Okay.
Good questions, and we're very much starting that sort of learning experience. Over the past couple of years, we've very much used the establishment of crops to integrate livestock. So the cover or the crops that we've used really in the main brassicas, which we tried to broadcast, and we can't get them across the 24 meters. So we have been establishing fodder brassicas into standing crops, for which we then have animals out grazing through the winter, and then that goes into the spring crop. At the moment, our timings are approximately 2 weeks before combining. We tried a little bit with keeping straw on and taking straw off to varying success, just depends on the quantity of straw really. We've tried some other small seeds, but around the mustard, and again, it seems to be about the 2 weeks before combining, but there's more for us to play around with on that one. So we'll certainly keep you updated on work.
Thank you very much. There's one here from Mark Taplin, and that is that Jane mentions slugs can be problematic on some soils with continuous crop cover. Any other unintended pest challenges? So thinking about things such as wireworm and FLM with changes in cropping and cultivations. So yeah, it can be, I guess, discuss.
Yeah, it's certainly, I guess it's, because I've come, I suppose, coming from a sort of rejoined academia in about the last 2 years, coming from more of an industry background, and something we tend to do is look at the positive benefits of a lot of the things that we work on, without necessarily giving due consideration of all of the risks that come along with some of those, and particularly when we start looking at systems that might be able to encourage biology in some way. It is important that we bear in mind that certainly from a farming perspective, not all biodiversity is good. There are pest insects, there are crop diseases, there's that element of bad biodiversity that you don't want to encourage. And the key is to try and get that balance right, so that you are promoting the things that are good, those things that will drive what we call those ecosystem services, so the good insects that might give you levels of pest control, for example, and that you drive those more than you're actually encouraging something like a key pest, for instance. And certainly if you do need to take due consideration of the sort of what those pests and diseases are across a rotation, and relevant to a soil type, and relevant to where a farming system is in its transition to Regen Ag approaches. And yeah, things like cover crops, for example, there's potential there for them to create what we call a green bridge, so essentially to extend the available resource and the available breeding season perhaps for pest and disease.
Dave, a really quick and easy one here. What is the name of the strip till drill used at Newcastle?
That was Ian Gould who asked that one.
Yeah, well, we have a John Deere 758 and the System Chameleon. I think the strip drill that David mentioned is the one at Stockbridge Technology Centre, which you've got the name of that one probably, David.
I think Jen might even be on the call somewhere, so it's Jen that's actually working now at Stockbridge with the strip till there. It's a Birchia sarcum. I think I'll pronounce that right.
We've got a couple of questions on the chameleon drill actually as well that have come in, so obviously there's some interest in that. So there's one from Hannah Foxall, which is, did the wider results in crops compensating with higher tiller numbers on the chameleon drill? I'll have to try and figure. Do you get what that one is? Sorry. Wider results in crop. Yeah. Compensate with higher tiller numbers. Yeah.
The System Chameleon drill, we haven't done any work with it yet, as it was only delivered this autumn, so that's a question might be best directed at McGregor Farms in the sort of first instance, but next year and the year after we would have a little bit more detail and be able to answer that one, I'm afraid.
No, we can pass that one on to Lee, can't we, and just get some feedback for him.
We certainly can. And another one, would the chameleon work well in more rocky soils, do we think?
I think you're going to get more metal worn in a rockier soil, but I haven't seen when we made the purchase, I haven't seen anything against it, but I don't have a lot of rocks within our soil types. You know, there isn't a lot of stone to really put me off having bought it, but it'd be well worth exploring with people that have rockier soils than us.
Yeah, we can pass chameleon questions on to Lee for sure. Now, I'm conscious we are running out of time, but if we're all okay, just to do a couple more minutes and then we'll close, just because we've got so many good questions, if that's okay with everybody. We've got one from, I think it's Chris Martin. Have you had to stop using any residual chemistry or ALS herbicides to allow broadcasting covers into a standing crop?
Not to date. It takes a little bit more thinking, but we haven't restricted ourselves at all. We tend to broadcast after glyphosate. Where we have used glyphosate, we tried a little bit without glyphosate this year, broadcasting in, and we've had a lot of competition with the crops coming through. So we will probably move back, provided it's still legal. We will move back to a glyphosate then establishment. But again, we'll start tweaking and trialing various different methods. So we'll be able to update on that as we go forward.
And we've had a response on that saying from Andy Cheatham, who says, we have a chameleon in Aberdeenshire, it doesn't like stone. So that was the previous question. And we also have quite a meaty one I'd like to end on just for a minute. If we've got any thoughts on it, it's a different angle. In practical and philosophical terms, to what extent might we understand that regenerative farming, as conceived by the principles covered in this webinar today, coordinates with the principles of agroecology, ecological agriculture, get my tongue around that, and organic agriculture? Does regenerative farming draw from agroecological and organic agriculture in any ways? That's quite a meaty one. Minute on that, and then we'll draw to a close.
I might use that as an assessment question for my student. But yes, I think, I mean, certainly something that I suppose so I would say, yes, it probably does. I think the key bit that probably underlines that, certainly when I first started working in agriculture, it was sort of, you had organic and you had conventional. I think what we now have is a spectrum of production systems that are a bit more flexible, perhaps, in terms of the things you can pick and choose from to be on a spectrum of what you might sort of term as general sustainability, or whatever the sort of latest term for it is. I think Regen Ag certainly does draw from elements of organic agriculture. It draws from elements of what you might call agroecological production systems as well.
I'm glad you could say that, because obviously I struggled with that. Anyway, I'll let Lindsay draw to a close. We'll just pop up the final slide and then there'll be information for how you can claim your basis point.
Thank you all very much. So I think that's the closing slide. So I think if you've got any more questions, please contact myself. You see my email address there, and I can forward them on to the speakers and the colleagues who provided videos. We'll try and get answers to all of them. It's been a very popular webinar, so there's obviously demand for it. We'll contact you with the recording, so you can pass it on to colleagues who are unable to be here. And also, as I said earlier, we'll share it on social media. And then final slide is the all-important basis point. So I'll leave that there with you for a while. And thank you again, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again in the future, maybe up in Newcastle. Cheers.